I really need a haircut. Today we are talking about a truly epic story. A massive book. A monstrous book. A book that may be a little bloated. The Stand by Stephen King. His longest work. And Stephen King's been known to write some doorstoppers. This book is not for the faint of heart. It took me 2 months to read this book. I finished 16 books while reading The Stand to get enough motivation to finally finish it. I'm making it sound like I didn't like it. That's not true. I loved it. But this book, change your reading goals. It'll really challenge you. But I'm so glad I saw this story through to the end. I had a hardcover version to read at home. I had a paperback version to read in the car. I had an ebook. I had an audiobook. And still, it took me 2 months. But this is truly a book you must be immersed in. If you are a fan of post-apocalyptic fiction, you have to read The Stand. It's basically required reading. It is still a classic. It is still widely read decades after it was published, and many people consider it to be Stephen King's most ambitious work. So let's talk about it. They're the good, the bad, the ugly, the complicated, the surprising. There's so much ground to cover with this book. You know the premise. A virus wipes out 99% of the population of Earth. The survivors are drawn to 2 separate camps, one led by the God-fearing Mother Abigail, and the other led by the Dark Man, Randall Flagg. This epic tale of good and evil spans over 1,000 pages. It's split into 3 parts: the fall of civilization, the gathering of the communities, and the stand at the end. And I will say, this is a very unbalanced work. It has to be said, The Stand is Stephen King at his best and at his worst. The pacing, it is so bad. The first 400 pages of this book, almost nothing happens. The pacing is glacial. The story is unbalanced. The climax is rushed. I truly believe that you could have cut 300 pages out of The Stand and you would have had a better story. That being said, if you would press me, if you would put a gun to my head, I can only think of a few scenes that I would have omitted. Mainly, every chapter of the Trash Can Man. I don't feel like that really contributed anything to the plot. Anything with the kid, I feel like you could have cut those completely out of the story, and then nothing would have changed. That is frustrating. Stephen King has a reputation of meandering, getting all bogged down in the plot, always getting caught up in the little minutia and the little details in his stories, as opposed to just focusing on the story he should be telling. That criticism is so true. But after I finished this story, this massive story, I was thankful that I had so much time to get to know these amazing characters. Stephen King writes some of the most realistic, lifelike characters in all of fiction, not just horror, all of fiction, period. A lot of his characters pass what I call the impersonation test. Can you impersonate a character, and someone else that has read the book will know exactly who you are talking about? The characters in The Stand, they all sound different. They all have different point of views. They all have different weaknesses. They all have different goals and hopes and dreams and worries and traumas, and they are just so lifelike. They are so dynamic. They grow, they rise to the occasion, they fall victim to their vices and their hubris, and there were so many characters in this book that I will never forget. My favorites in particular were Glenn Bateman and Tom Cullen. Nick Andros was also really cool. So many great characters. And when you put several of these great characters into a scene, none of them get outshone by the... And when you put several of these great characters into one scene, none of them outshine each other. You could tell who is talking. You could tell. And when you put many of these characters into the same scenes, the interactions and the dialogue are amazing. It is lifelike. I felt like I was there. I was a fly on the wall during these conversations. I was watching these things happen. Stephen King really knows how to bring a story to life through his characters. And it has to be said, the writing in this book is really dang good. There are several scenes, several chapters in this massive tome that are just tattooed on my mind. They were so realistic. I was transported there. Franny in the parlor, that was an amazing scene. Looking back on Nick Andros' past brought tears to my eyes. Glenn Bateman, You know what speech I'm talking about. Glenn Bateman's speech chills down my spine. That one chapter, No Great Loss, that could have been a short story in itself. Like, there's one chapter in the middle of The Stand where it's just talking about people who are, running into all manner of misfortune during the apocalypse. And none of these people are important to the plot, but they're going through these tragedies. And it was such a beautifully written chapter. The most beautifully written chapter in the book was a chapter that had nothing to do with the plot, and it should have been its own standalone short story. Stephen King just did whatever he wanted with this book. And sometimes I think it was a massive success, and sometimes I think it was a miscalculated failure. But damn it, this book is a masterpiece, a flawed masterpiece, but truly, Stephen King is a master storyteller. One of the main complaints about The Stand is that the ending was bad. It was rushed. It was anticlimactic. And to some extent, I agree. The climax was very much underwhelming. I did not enjoy the climax of this story. Before you read The Stand, you'll talk to other people that have read it, and they'll be like, the hand of God, the hand of God, the hand of God scene. Isn't that awesome? So I was waiting for this epic climax at the end of the story. And that's not what I got. There's this giant build-up to this big confrontation, and everything's ended in half a page. A book this long deserves longer than half a page of climax. It's frustrating. The one saving grace of that ending was not the climax, because there's about 130 pages of falling action after the climax of The Stand. So I wouldn't even agree that the ending of this book was bad, because the ending was quite good. It hit you in the feels. But the climax, yes, indeed, it was rushed. Another complaint people have about The Stand is that there are many character arcs that are cut short. Things are foreshadowed that don't end up happening. And that is very frustrating, because we're waiting for this catharsis and we don't get it. But why doesn't that bug me? I'm going to come to the defense of Stephen King in this respect. Post-apocalyptic fiction is supposed to be unpredictable. The idea that things should make sense in stories is a holdover from the orderly world that we live in. We live in a very stable world. We could trust things to happen a certain way. But in post-apocalyptic fiction that take place after civilization, after the stability that civilization brings, I think it makes perfect sense for crazy things to happen in the plot that you can't foresee, that really destroy all foreshadowing. Stephen King throws some curveballs in The Stand. And when I was reading them initially, I was super frustrated. I was very angry. But as more time has passed since I've read The Stand, it's been a few months, I've really thought about and meditated on how realistic that is. Post-apocalyptic fiction is so interesting, it's so compelling, because we don't know what's going to happen after civilization collapses. Like, we very much have evolved to survive, to adapt in our very stable, sanitized world. This existence we live in is in no way relatable or connected to a post-civilization world. So yes, things happen that don't make sense if you look at the foreshadowing, if you look at what people are foreseeing, but that doesn't bug me. So I've talked about the good and the bad of The Stand, but how about the surprising? The biggest surprise I had about The Stand was just how overtly Christian it was. I dare say, I would categorize The Stand as Christian literature. A lot of people would disagree with me, but I think that is so clear, that is so apparent when you read it. There are so many allusions to Job, and that was very surprising, because I've read 19 Stephen King books, various novellas, a bunch of short stories, and if you've read a lot of Stephen King books, I'm sure you've noticed this as well. If you are a religious fundamentalist in a Stephen King story, you are almost always the bad guy, or you're going to be associated with the bad guy. Usually, in Stephen King books, Christian fundamentalists use their faith as a reason to do evil, heinous, and deplorable things, and to take away all their accountability for it. But not in The Stand. That was so impressive. That was so surprising to me. Mother Abigail is a Christian fundamentalist. And the way she was depicted was so inspiring. The way she inspired those around her was so moving. It was a very tender thing in this book that I was not anticipating. I did not think Christian literature or Christian literature adjacent was in Stephen King's wheelhouse. I thought he just had so many personal prejudices about that. But he showed me that he's able to tackle philosophical and religious themes in a way that is devoid. There's a complete absence of his usual cynicism about organized religion, about faith in general. And that was a nice surprise. I really liked that. Is The Stand a book that leaves the reader with all their questions answered? Do you leave this book feeling a great sense of catharsis? No. There are a lot of loose ends, a lot of things I wish I could see how they turned out. And initially, when I finished this book, it was quite underwhelming. I was a little disappointed, and I was frustrated because a lot of my friends were like, this book is amazing, an absolute masterpiece. And as I've meditated more about this book, as I've thought about it, as more distance and time has passed since I finished it, it grows better and better with age. The Stand ages like fine wine. And though it was an absolute trial to get through, I know without a shadow of a doubt that I will reread this monster again one day. I am very excited for the release of The End of the World as We Know It. This is an anthology of stories that take place in the world of The Stand. It's Stephen King's first authorized collection of works from other authors that take place in this world. Maybe we'll get the answers to some of the questions that we all have, because there's a lot left on the table for this book, and I'm just super surprised that Stephen King never returned to this setting. The Stand by Stephen King is a masterpiece, one of the great American novels. It is massive in scope, it is complicated, it is challenging to get through, but I love the journey I went on. It took me over 2 months to read it, but I don't regret a single moment I spent reading this book. And it truly does get better and better with age, and I'm thankful that I have read it. I don't care that it completely ruined my reading schedule for 2024. I don't regret reading this book one bit. And Stephen King is my favorite author. He rules. I will always read what he writes, and we're so lucky to have an author as prolific and as accomplished and as good as Stephen King writing in 2025. Thank you guys for watching this video. I'll talk to you guys next time.